Yogi Berra was a catcher for the Yankees in the 1940s and 1950s and early 1960s as well. He was an iconic baseball figure for a lot of funny things that he said. He was a good baseball player, but he was mostly known for things that he said. One of the things that he was famous for saying for, he said one time, "If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else." Now, this is kind of a funny statement. It doesn't really make much sense because if you don't know where you're going, then there's no place to end up somewhere else too. But you can laugh at the nonsensical nature of this quote, but the quote really has a purpose, it has a point. And this quote's especially relevant for managers, makers of decisions, and people at the top of groups who want to collaborate on a project or something like that. And what Berra is trying to say is that you, as an organization, as some type of leader of a group, need to understand what direction your group, your firm, your team is going towards. And this can be found, and this is a skill called planning. And specifically, organizational planning is what I want to talk about today. So one of the important elements of organizational planning is goal setting. You can't go anywhere if you don't know where you're going to begin with, as Yogi Berra said. So the purpose of goals is to provide direction, so everyone in your company, in your team, in your organization can know what direction you're going in, where you're going to. It can also provide a measuring stick for any plan that you make. If you make a plan and it doesn't aim at some sort of goal, then it's kind of a worthless plan, right? It also is a benchmark for success. We can also look at plans in retrospect saying, hey, well, we put this plan into place, we enacted it, did we achieve our goal? So it can achieve a couple things, both in foresight and also in retrospect as well. And there's different types of goals, and I'm going to be talking about the specific types of goals as they correspond to different types of planning. But the different types of goals can include strategic goals, tactical goals, and operational goals. Goals in these different strata differ in timetable, scope, and in the level which they come from, whether it be from the top executive, upper management, middle management, lower management, etc. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is types of planning. And there are 4 types of planning, 3 of which you enact for sure, and the 4th of which you don't necessarily have to enact all the time, but you definitely have to have it just in case. So the first type of planning is strategic. This comes from the top brass, top executives, as a very broad scope and a longer timetable. Potentially, you're looking at goals down several years into the future, potentially, and it's a bigger scale. The next type of planning would be tactical planning, and this is carried out usually by upper and middle management. It's for the purpose, ultimately, of a strategic goal for the mission of the company, but it is on a more intermediate timetable and a more intermediate scope as well. So not necessarily super long, not inherently years into the future, but it's definitely longer than operational. And speaking of which, operational planning is typically carried out by lower middle management. It has a smaller and narrower scope and a quicker timetable as well. And this is more day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month type operations that you see here. So the 4th type of planning is not necessarily normal, it's a special type of planning, and it's a plan that you have just in case. It's a contingency plan, and it's necessary for crisis management because there are things that happen that you don't expect and that are going to happen that you don't foresee, like potentially a pandemic, something like that. But you have to have these types of plans just in case something like that happens, but you don't necessarily want to use this type of plan all the time. So now we understand the elements of operational planning. You have goal setting, you have your types of planning. Now you look at what the process is of making a plan and the process is of putting a plan into action. So again, we talk about goals, and the first thing you want to do is establish your goal. You want to collaborate with the people, the brass, the executives, the management, and get them all on the same page to understand what the goal is. So you communicate that and you collaborate that. So see, we have some nice alliteration over here: collaborate, communicate, and convert. And converting that specific part is converting that goal into a course of action. So that's the second step, is you're translating the goal that you just established and communicated into an actionable course. Again, you have the collaboration communication element in this step. Unfortunately, we don't get the alliteration here. You have examined for solvency as that last point, because you want to look at the goal, the course of action that you suggest, and see if it will actually lead you to the ultimate goal that you have. So you're looking to see if that plan will actually solve your problem, if you see that that action will actually carry out your goal. So I wanted to apply the elements that I brought up here to a situation that I would like to be in the real world. So my ideal job at some point would be to be the general manager of a baseball team. And so, we break this down, we look at the processes of planning, right? And you set team goals, right? Team goals could be something more broad, like, well, okay, I want to win a championship at X amount of years into the future. And you could do that through more specific goals like acquiring draft capital, acquiring prospects, acquiring players, and improving specific elements of your organization or your team, potentially fixing a salary cap situation. Each team's needs vary, and thus the goals vary on different levels, but I believe every team at some point wants to win a championship. And so the next thing would be converting that goal into an actionable plan. And these actions, those plans that you take would be to trade. Let's say if you're an older team and you want to rebuild, say you want to go back into being a younger developmental team, you trade your older players, you take your older players, you trade them for assets, for prospects, for draft capital, and then you use that draft capital and you draft them. So that's a plan, right? And then other ways that you could do this is to be improving internal departments like scouting and development as well. So these are some actions that you can take in the real world, and you look at this. And especially in sports, you want to look at the importance of contingency, because injuries happen frequently, suspensions happen, sicknesses happen. We see that a lot, especially this season. So a lot happens in sports that you don't necessarily expect. So it is always important to have contingency plans, to have backup plans, whether it be personnel-wise or salary cap-wise. So looking at the real world, I think this is how you can apply what we're talking about here in organizational planning into what I want to do, becoming the general manager of a sports team. So ultimately, we look at organizational planning through this lens and these elements that I've brought forward. So to make a plan as an organization is a prerequisite to success. If your organization cannot plan correctly, then your organization will die. You cannot carry out any course of action without understanding planning. And you separate those out into the two basic elements of setting goals and then converting those goals. You take the goals that you want to achieve, you get on the same page with it, you communicate through your organization, and then you take that and you convert it into an actionable plan and examine it by whether that plan will actually complete the goal. And you carry that out at different levels of your organization, whether that be more long-term, short-term, or intermediate. So all of these things, ultimately, this is what makes up organizational planning. It is an absolutely necessary skill for anyone in any sort of decision-making role to have, and any sort of manager to have.